one spectator was killed, and we express condolences to his family, Corey Comprador. 2 others were critically injured, David Dutch, James Copenhaver. And then narrowly escaping with his life was former President Trump. That's why we're here. And the timeline is probably too small for you to read, but I'm going to go over the timeline just briefly, and with the experts here in just a second. But first, I want to acknowledge also our condolences to the 13 veterans killed in Afghanistan during that disastrous retreat. I also acknowledge our colleague Bob Good's presence today, his interest in this, appreciate his interest in this. Our former colleague Jason Chaffetz and Mark Morgan, we appreciate all of you being here today. So let's take a look at this from the local perspective. Ben, thank you for being here. Let's talk about the communications. Let's just start there. Was there a central communications center in place?
Yes, there were. That was provided by the Butler Emergency Services Unit.
And typically, who was the Secret Service? Did they have a person on the scene, a decision maker on the scene in case an emergency happened?
I believe that there were a Secret Service agent responsible for the scene. However, they were not, to my knowledge, co-located at the command center itself.
And so I want to make clear. So who was present in the communications command center that might have made decisions for Secret Service?
Secret Service, my understanding is that the information that was gathered by the command center, which would have been being operated by the Butler Emergency Services Unit and the commander in that capacity. He was responsible for relaying that information to a point of contact he had, and my understanding was that it was over a cell phone as opposed to in-person communications.
Is that normal to have a cell phone communication, or is there usually a body there that can make a decision?
In most security postures and events that I've been part of for these types of events, there is someone actually physically co-located for that reason. Due to the loss of cell phone service, which we experienced that day, a possible loss of radio communications that day. It's a very robust and fail-proof way to communicate because of the level of importance that's needed.
Let's put it this way. Were radios and communication implements offered to Secret Service by the local operators?
They were, yes.
And what was the form of the communication?
The form of communication would have been some type of encrypted law enforcement style radio.
And do you know, did the Secret Service avail themselves of that? Did they obtain those radios?
I believe they were offered, but I do not believe they were taken.
So they did not utilize the preferred mechanisms of communications that was offered to them?
That's correct.
Let's talk timeline for a second. So if we look at this timeline, it indicates to us, let me go 5:10, at 5:10 p.m., the shooter is identified as a suspicious person near the AGR building. Does that sound right to what you're understanding of the timeline?
Yes, sir.
And so at least some point, somebody had seen him by 5:10 p.m. That's an hour before the shooting. They adjudicated he was suspicious. And in testimony before the committees of Congress, they indicated to us that, when I say they, I'm talking Cheadle, Rowe, and Ray, the directors and interim directors of Secret Service and FBI. They indicated to us that there's a distinction between a suspicious person and a threat. And so you have a suspicious individual, you have a threat, there's an interim category as well. What's that interim category?
In our line of communications from a SWAT point of view and from a tactical point of view, our escalation of people that we encounter starts out as a suspicious person, then goes to a person of interest, and then from that level upgrades to what we refer to as a threat. And each one of those warrant a different response.
So the actual shooting takes place right about 6:11 p.m., so an hour elapses. How soon after the first identification of the shooter, which is at 5:10 p.m., did you, before we get there, let's lay the foundation. What were you doing that day?
I was in a counter sniper role with one of my teammates in the southwest quadrant of the event center. Distance-wise, it was approximately 238 yards southwest of the podium and approximately 348 south-southwest of the shooter's final firing position.
And so he was not ever in your sector of responsibility?
Nor in my visual, nor sector, nor visual.
Okay.
I never had visual.
How soon after he's identified were you given information that, or did you hear information that there was a suspicious character that you should be alerted to?
Believe those text messages came across, and just to give some background on the text message tactics. So in this type of event, as tactical officers, we try to build redundancy in communications because it's so critical. We start out in a primary role, which would have been our radios that day, communicating on a designated channel amongst all the tactical operators. Because we were in support of the host agency, which would have been the Butler, the Emergency Services Unit, we also were running a secondary channel that was our local Washington Regional SWAT team channel. On top of that, the snipers and counter snipers, or I should just say the counter snipers, there were no snipers involved in our chat, had set up another chat to be able to provide any type of pictures or any type of relevant media or anything like that that we'd have been able to crosstalk.
So did you ever see any pictures, were any pictures ever sent to you?
They were. The pictures came across the chat at approximately 5:38.
So about 30 minutes after the shooter, then at that time he was a suspicious individual?
That's correct.
And when he gets up on the roof and he's crawling across the roof, is that what threat assessment would normally be made of that guy at that point?
Sure. I think it's important to mention that, from the time the original pictures were taken, the comment of him possibly having a rangefinder or that he was confirmed to have a rangefinder at that point would have automatically escalated him in our protocols from a suspicious person into a person of interest. And that would have warranted some type of either investigatory detention or a stop and question at that point when the rangefinder became a factor.
Ben, Mr. Shaffer, at what point in that hour or before were you notified of the rangefinder, the use of a rangefinder?
Within minutes of the original information being passed. So I would say shortly after 5:38 p.m. or 17:38.
Thank you so much.
My time's expired.